Good evening, everybody. Everybody here in the Orange Tribune of the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment of TU Delft, as well as those watching us from home via YouTube Live. I'm very happy to be celebrating today the second BK Talks this week. Last night we had another very interesting event on ethnography. Today we are changing subject, but this is what the BK Talks are about. It's about talking about as many topics as possible. We try to touch upon every possible topic the faculty is looking at. We have been organizing this. Thanks to the Circularity in the Built Environment Hub. I want to thank you, especially Tillman Klein and the rest of the team. Nicolette is sitting in the tribune with us. And I will let Tillman later, the moderator, present the rest of our speakers, which are here with us today. This is the second BK Talks we celebrate on circularity. The first one took place last year in 2020. And I didn't really know what to talk about today. First of all, because I am not a specialist in circularity, but I know that time keeps ticking. In 2020, we celebrated this other talk with members of the faculty. Nicolette was also involved in it. And I didn't know what to talk about today. I didn't know what to say, but I actually look at the presentation that I gave last year and see what has changed. Let's say my relationship with circularity started in 2013 when I was appointed curator of an exhibition in Paris. She was my client, the mayor of Paris, and she asked me via the Pavillon de l'Arsenal whether I could curate an exhibition about 100 years of social housing in the city of Paris. That was a huge task for me. So what I did was actually look at her program for the city and try to understand what Anne Hidalgo was presenting for the city of Paris in her electoral program. And I typed the word circulaire, which means circular, and in her program, I found 16 times the word circular, which tells us about the certain ambitions of a certain politician. No? I will not go into the details, but for me it was really interesting to understand, in order to talk about 100 years of housing and 100 years of life, what circularity meant for somebody who was in charge of a city or a metropolis like Paris is. Well, without going into the details, I kept looking at politicians that are involved and try to include circularity in their agendas. And last year, in the middle of the pandemic, another great mayor for another great city, Amsterdam, which is a little bit closer to us, launches this other program, including circularity together with her, with Kate Raworth. Again, I look at the files, I look at the documents, and I type circular. And I found circular written 16 times again. This is just a coincidence, of course. But I was interested in seeing how circularity was being addressed in 2013. How was it being addressed by politicians, actually, in 2020? And it was interesting to see a little bit the difference. At the same time, when I was preparing the BK Talks last year, NASA was publishing this image, this, let's say, at least intriguing image. What we see there are the wildfires taking place in the north of California and the smoke produced by them being brought to the east coast of the United States. At the same time, another Celco, this hurricane, was attacking or arriving to the coast of the US Caribbean. Another hurricane was at the same time in the making in the equatorial Atlantic. The leftovers of another hurricane were impacting the Portuguese coast. And even more, a Medican, which is a hurricane in the Mediterranean, was impacting the coast of Italy and of Greece. This is, for me, the most impacting, let's say, one of the image of circles I was thinking about when I prepared that BK Talks. It's funny because I sent that image to Vinny Mas, with whom I work, and he said, well, in 2004, we were already doing the same work. We were already talking about the necessity of being more circular and if circular is a word, and intervening in the way our planet is going. No? So we keep, since then, been talking about mass consumerism, addiction to growth, the 1%, take, make, use, lose. I think these are all terms we are very accustomed to already, you know. But time goes by. In the meantime, of course, the United States architects declare climate, justice, biodiversity emergencies. and with all that that means. No? So of course we are more and more aware, but if we come to today, to a couple of weeks ago, I was checking on this event, COP26, and see what has happened, how politicians especially keep tackling the problem of circularity, not only circularity, but let's say climate change, climate breakdown. No? I had a curiosity look at the Google images of COP26, and we see this sea of blue and green and planetary stuff, and politicians meeting and politicians talking within the building, which is actually a building by Norman Foster, the Armadillo in Glasgow. And they are inside within this decoration, within these, let's say, backgrounds, again and again, all of them together. And then I said, well, where is the people when I actually Google COP26? And the people are here. The people are all outside. The people are protesting in the streets. I don't know what the next term will be, but what I think is really important is that time keeps passing, that the clocks keep ticking, and we are running out of time at all scales. We will talk about circularity at all scales today, from the very small to the very big. In any case, time is passing. So I really hope that tonight, with the BK Talks, we can address those making decisions and we can actually let them work a little bit faster. So I really hope that tonight academia can help us build that bridge between what society wants and what politicians are taking so much time to do. So I will give the word to Tilman. He will be the moderator of the session tonight, and he will introduce all our presenters. So Tilman, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Javier, for setting the stage for this event tonight. Also, welcome from my side for you here sitting in the room, and for those watching online. Unfortunately, we cannot see you, but well, we are happy to hear your opinion. I was told there is a chat option in the YouTube channel, but it's not really working because there's a big delay. But please, if you have thoughts about the lecture, if you have questions, send us an email, which you can see on the slide here, and I promise we will follow up later on. Yeah, as you've heard, circularity is not a new topic here. A year ago, we had a session on it as well at BK Talks. And so this time we don't want to talk too much about the urgency or the why, but rather go a bit more into detail. So my name is Tilman Klein. I'm Professor of Building Product Innovation, and I'm happy to moderate this session today. And with me here today are a number of great colleagues that work in the field. So first we have Mark Postel. Mark Postel is founder of FERM, and FERM stands for Fair Materials Through Fermentation. And next to me is Connie BK. Connie BK is Professor of Design Methodology for Sustainability and Circular Economy here at the TU Delft Faculty Industrial Design and Engineering. Welcome, Connie. Then to my left, Paul de Ruyter. He's owner of Paul de Ruyter Architects, an agency that is specialized in sustainable architecture. Good you're here. And then I go to Alice ten Dam. Alice ten Dam is Commercial Director of Royal Haskoning DHV and has a long track record of sustainable building and also circular design. And then on the left side is Olga Ioanu. She's Assistant Professor for Architecture Engineering, the Department of the Faculty of Architecture. And she's also steering committee of the Circular Built Environment Hub here. And her specialty is in integrating circularity into education. You might have noticed we have a slight change because Joost van Vaassen couldn't join us tonight. Well, but he was very much involved in the beginning, and he sends his greetings. And so, well, but Olga is here with us. Welcome. So, the nice thing about this online format is, of course, that you can see more information about the panelists on the website. I forgot to say that. So this is why we can have a brief introduction here. Yeah, you're all invited because you're experts on the field. and on different scales you're working and in different roles. And to be honest, it was kind of tempting to just have you give a good lecture about your work, just sit back. But we have a different plan today because we want to engage in a discussion about current issues where we're busy with. And I want to start with this quote, and Connie is laughing because I've used that before. This comes from a paper, Critiques of the Circular Economy, and it states that there's clearly a need for conceptual coherence about definitions, plans, implementations, and modes of evaluation. And that's actually something we are busy here at the faculty. Well, let me just tell you a little bit what we're doing. So we have the Circular Built Environment Hub, and that is a platform of teachers and researchers here at the faculty. About 70 people are involved, and we have about 24 projects at the moment. Small projects from about 20,000 euros, so they're financed externally, up to big projects to 1 million. So a lot of knowledge is created. And what we're busy, we're writing stories, and you can find them on our website. And you'll find that the stories go from the scale of materials, buildings, component design, but also neighborhood planning, regional planning. And that is a lot of information that is created. We also engaged in education. You can see our online offer. Some of the material has been created in collaboration with industrial design. Actually, they're hosted by industrial design. Some of it done here, and also they work on different scales, company scale, material scale, city scale. So again, the scales pop up in the work that we're doing. And then also I'd like to remind you of the graduation award that we have implemented the second time now, and where students can hand in their work and apply on a number of categories. Again, it's material components, buildings, cities and regions, and there's also a cross-scale component, and we have this year 4 great winners. But it's all showing that scale for us really matters. And basically, to come back to that quote, what we're trying to do is create a coherent image of how all the different work in this very complicated circular landscape is coming together. And that is our mode of working. So what you can see is the different scales which are in the circle, and this is the scales seen holistically, we view through a lens, and that's how we're trying to explain the world. And the word of circularity, and around it is a ring of certain aspects from economy, management, technology, design, of course, the stakeholder part, and the business side. And that goes basically across all scales. And by doing that, we're trying basically to create this picture and bring a bit system in the chaos. So that's the main function of the hub that we have. And so, now, let me look at my notes here. So that's why you're here as experts, to help us unraveling this piece and basically check if that model works. And now we come to the mode of the day. Actually, what we thought is we have short presentations of views. One, of course, so the audience can learn a little bit more about you, but also to give us your view on the scales. And after that, we come and discuss a number of propositions together. And we will not unravel these at the moment. That will come later. So first, we're going to have our 5 first pitches. And I'd like to give Mark the floor.
Thank you, Timon. Hi, my name is Mark Postel. I'm one of the 2 co-founders of FERM. And before I talk about what we do at FERM and how scale matters to us, I'm going to talk a little bit about... Oh. That's the wrong... Yeah. And how... I'm going to talk a little bit about me and... well, because Because only 5 years ago I was an alumni, or I'm an alumni, and only 5 years ago I was in this same room at the other side of the room, asking questions, as you can see, but mainly being, well, agreeing, sometimes disagreeing. And it was here that I found the inspiration to deviate from my path of becoming a building engineer and got into entrepreneurship. Because I missed on the level of circularity we were talking back then, I missed the role of natural materials other than wood and which role they could play in our transition of the construction industry towards a circular economy. And well, fast forward 5 years, I founded Ferm last year. We're a biotechnology company making construction materials, and we use fermentation to bind together natural fibers in a form of a rigid insulation material we call Ferm foam. And you could call it the styrofoam of nature. And it has great acoustic and thermal insulating properties. It also has great fire safety. But more importantly, I think, it has the potential to reduce impact of insulation materials tremendously. And it's not that we have to develop a material that has the best ecological footprint, but it's the scale at which we produce it to replace our current materials that really matters. So that's how scale matters to us. And that's why we developed a technology to scale this production to an industrial level. And next year we hope to pilot this. In 23 we hope to have our first production line operating, and later this decade we hope to have a factory where we can produce this material even cheaper than styrofoam. So we're getting rid of styrofoam in the construction industry. And if you talk about scale, then our challenge is to go from lab scale to an industrial scale. And it's not about production only, because it's where do you source your materials? Where do you find your clients, and how do you find your clients to meet that scale? And ultimately, where do you raise the capital to afford all that? And before you know it, you turn into the business person using this kind of horrible stock images you once despised as being part of the problem instead of part of the solution. And I think that's where scale is very, very important, because thinking big about sustainability is thinking very different than thinking big, bigger, biggest, as, well, certain parts of our economy are currently doing. And it's really about understanding the right context, about the right skill, and touching into that fabric of society, of the economy, of all that different flows that go around. And that's actually what we research with Ferm. How do we tap into local material flows, energy flows, although, well, those are maybe even already kind of researched and we know that. But what I find most important is how do we tap into the fabric of culture? How do we tap into the fabric of the economy? And how do we make how do we meet the right skill there? That's what we research, and if we are able as a society to find an answer to those kind of questions, I think we can make a real impact on the right skill. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So Mark, thank you very much. I think it's very interesting that you work with a project that's basically material based, but you connect it to the people, landscape, the wider scale, but also to the finance system that also works in kind of scale. So thank you very much for that input, and we'll keep that in mind. Yeah. And then now, Connie, it's your turn.
So hi, my name is Connie BK. I am with the Faculty of Industrial Design, and in that faculty we basically teach our students how to design products and services. And many people think, including many of our students, that design is really about this intimate relation between a person and a product, and shaping that intimate relation. And to some extent, of course, they're right, because our designers spend an enormous amount of time working on that. But there's more to be said, because not only do we shape this relationship, like with the smartphone, for instance, but these smartphones, of course, also shape us. And so there's a bidirectional relationship between product and person. And smartphones have had, as an example, have had an amazing impact, for instance, on the way we have shaped our society, how society has changed, the way we do business, the way we shop, the way we relate to each other, the way we experience concerts. So I would like to argue that we not only actually are responsible for the micro level, but our work extends towards society and towards people, and actually my work as a sustainable designer and circular designer extends even beyond the social and the societal into a material and energy world, and which happens actually on a global scale. So taking this smartphone as an example, we have to look at the materials that go into such a phone. So that can be conflict materials coming from Africa with all kinds of ethical and social issues. It can be critical materials. We need to look at the way these materials are mined or produced otherwise, which does not happen in the Netherlands, how these phones are produced with all social impacts related to that, how they are distributed across the world, and then they're used. And of course this use requires massive amounts of energy and materials for the cloud services that we want and the video streaming that we want. Oops. And of course, and this is actually really what my work focuses on, how can we get people to keep these products for as long as possible? Because many of our products, they have actually rather fast replacement rates, and we count product life in years. Unlike you guys at architecture, you think of products in terms of decades or even centuries. For us, that is a different story. So this repair, keeping products in use for as long as possible is really important. And also thinking about what happens at the end of life, at recycling. So in this very, very short pitch, because it's not even 5 minutes, I think, I've tried to talk to you about the importance for us as designers of both looking at the micro level, this relationship between person and product, and at a global scale, understanding where products come from, how they impact society and how they change us as people. So for us, what we try to do in our design education is teaching designers how to zoom in and zoom out and how to sort of like make these very complex decisions, which they are, both on a micro scale and on a macro scale. So that's in a nutshell the kind of work I do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Connie. Well, very interesting if you understand how much is involved in designing a similar simple product and the effect that has, the impact that we make on in a global scale. We're going to take that with us for the next round. Paul, now it's your time.
Thank you. Yeah. I hope I can work like this. Yeah. Hi, I'm Paul de Ruiter. I'm an architect and I've been trained here in the University of Delft. Let's see if it's going to work. And afterwards I did a PhD in 1992. And the idea was that buildings should produce energy instead of consuming energy. And that's the starting point of my career. But I was not such a good, let's say, researcher. So my promoter, Mick Eekhout, who was just recently is with retirement, he said, well, maybe you should start building. So I started my own company in 1994, and I'm still doing my PhD, so I hope to finish it in a certain time. But one of the things is, of course, well, we talk about circularity, but I thought it would be nice just to show you a building, how everything goes integrated into the sustainability. And for me, today, sustainability is about people. People are in the middle of everything, like you should be happy, you should be healthy. And that you try to do with as less as possible energy. You try to save the ecology as much as possible. And you try to do it as less as material as possible. Well, this is going to talk about this. This is a specific point, but more to the thing than just only materials. And I thought, okay, skill matters. Well, skill matters, and this is a stunning skill, you could say. This is the amount of people going to produce the CO2 now in the future. There are going to be like maybe 10 billion people. And the red line is the line which you should create just to reduce the CO2 in order not to, warm up the planet. So skill matters a lot, and also urgency matters a lot, because let's say till now, hardly any products are being used in a circular way. They're only used in one linear way, and we need we have a big challenge, and we need this is like the game-changing moment just to change the idea of how you produce and build buildings. Well, of course, different models for it. Maybe you see them all, but one of the models is that you try to use as less possible material and try to use it, if you use it, as responsible as possible, and you try to recycle it and so forth. And in the end, you can maybe register it in Madaster, for example, so you can retrieve it later on. The other one, the other pyramid says, well, try to be as good as possible in the sense that try to use materials that are more bio-based and try to get those buildings or those products to make the building. Well, another model which is used here also quite a lot in Delft is the layer of brand, where you say, well, not all materials have the same length of lifespan in a building, so why should we not focus more on the structure, which is very lasting? Maybe you can use concrete, for example, and later on, if you use, for example, interior things which last less longer, maybe you can have more bio-based materials. This is the intermediate model, you could say, for a longer thing. Eventually, we're going to try to build everything, also the structures maybe in a long-term way without concrete, but with wood, for example. And I thought, okay, it would be nice just to show you a building. It's a LEED Platinum building in QO Hotel in Amsterdam, what we designed. And there, a LEED Platinum certification says that you have to source your materials in a range of 800 kilometers, that's 500 miles. Well, if you live in the Netherlands, well, you only have half the sea, so you only have one part of Europe you can use. So no materials for Italy, for example, no marble is allowed because it's too much, let's say, transport, for example. But also you have to think in consideration this LEED Platinum, that you have to have recycled content in the building and also not toxic materials. So we had a big challenge to find this material. So, for example, the building to the left it's an old shell building. It was been demolished in Amsterdam, so we reused the concrete of the facade and we put it in the new concrete of the structure of the building. One of the examples which is very local, like local mining, which is something what can happen, but also about thinking very smartly about reusing, using and reducing the materials. For example, the concrete, you use balls so you can have less concrete and more strength and less weight. But also the materials which you have to use in LEED Platinum, for example, it's have to be very healthy and in one way recyclable. And well, what's most recyclable is of course bio-based materials. So a lot of things have been bio-based and non-toxic. And then also try to create less waste in the building site. And one of the things is that the normal building site produces about 100 kilos of waste. And a LEED Platinum you only can use 10 kilos of waste. So you have to rethink the whole way of supplying the building site. And then we came up with the idea just to make like IKEA type of hotel rooms, and we've been cut in the fabrication of the factory. We cut them just on the right size, so the waste of the material stays in the factory, and then you could reassemble it on site. Well, this is one of the things were interesting, but also one of the things which I was really also involved with on how you make energy neutrality for a building like this. And then we never made a hotel, and then we found out that the hotel room is on 24 hours. So if you leave your hotel room, it's you take out your key and then electricity goes out, but all the time the heat and the cooling and the air conditioning stays on. But most people are only 8 hours a day in a hotel room. So then we come up with the idea that if you just take out your key card, that also the electricity from the HVAC, the water, or cooling and heating and the air gets shut off. And then maybe you can press on it. And then we thought, okay, well, we have to, of course, save the energy. So then if you leave your room, the shutters close, and then the heat of that moment stays in the room. So talking about, let's say, shortage also can create new architecture. So also, let's say, that's all the hotels in the rest of the world are on 24 hours a day because they only have to stay on for 8 hours. So I thought it would be interesting to see that also this kind of things could happen with materials. Okay, thank you.
Very nice, Paul, how you showed that you're trying to reduce the distance where your supply comes from. You have now a circle of 500 kilometers. Can you make that circle even shorter, or is that desirable?
Well, it's very difficult to resource materials nearby, but it's really interesting because if you look at it, there are a lot of materials available, and it's much more effort, of course. But in the end, I think it's going to be an interesting option to look for local materials.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing these ideas. Alice is the next one with her pitch.
Okay, hi everybody. I'd like to discuss tonight the topic of use instead of ownership. So as a consultant in the built environment, I'm working a lot with users and their organizations to determine what do we need, how are we going to use it, what is really helping us in our primary processes to what environment really can we benefit from. And on these pictures you see typical places like squares and park where you see many users, a variety of users, and they don't own the place. They are not related, directly related as a tenant or as such, but they make use of the place and they benefit from it. And I think in the built environment you see a lot of places also. If you look closely to the top right picture, you see actually it's the roof of the Nemo Museum in Amsterdam, the Science Museum in Amsterdam. And I really think it's great that the owner of this building or the operator of this building is giving access to other users than the museum visitors, and they can make use of it and benefit from it. So I believe that in the built environment we can share far more than we do at this moment, and that users can benefit from it, and they come across other people, and these crossovers are even of more importance for us to develop and thrive. And it's not really new. We see this already for centuries even. Like the university in Bologna is really intertwined with the city. And you see that the facilities are used across organizations. Another example is the high-tech campus in Eindhoven, where until 2003, Philips really was the only user, and it was even a closed campus. And from that point on, so from 2003 on, they opened it to other users. And the crossovers between those companies are really important for the success of these of the people and the organizations there. As Royal Haskoning DHV, the company I work with, we started in 2017 to work in a community of startups. And actually we first had a really boring office, like lots of offices. And this community, we were actually looking for a place where we could co-create with others, which was inspiring, which was healthy, energy neutral and circular for us and others. And you see that we share facilities like the restaurant area where we can co-create with others, where we can co-work with others, where we can have gatherings like tonight. We even have a small theater, which we could never afford if we would just only use it by ourselves. So I think this sharing is really interesting in a lot of ways. I also like the building Pulse here on the TU Delft campus. Even as a visitor, when I meet students who work with us, I can use the building. I can go into rooms which are not used for classes, and I really think that's great that the space is there, and we can share peaks of usage, and I think it's a far more. It's not only sustainable, it's also really interesting for our activities and our connection to others. We see this, of course, also with staff. So lots of examples you will also come across, encounter in your own life, like sharing bicycles, etc. And another thing I like to mention is third places. This is, if you Google third places, it's a concept which exists already for many decades. And it's really about places where people encounter each other, where you see, it's a place not of a specific owner, but people start to use places and come across each other. And it really has benefits for society and to engage people. So drivers are in many ways. So the first example I like to mention here too, that we as Royal House Connie BK also come to this campus and like to have the crossovers with you as students, as researchers. You see the driver as that it's more sustainable when we share spaces and resources. Definitely footprints reduction is taking place, but it's also interesting cost-wise, investment costs, but also yearly costs if you share spaces and stuff. But how do you do this? How do you get these places where you can share? And I think it really starts with thinking broader than your first client or your first target group where you design for or you develop for. So think about value other stakeholders, other users could have for this place. And the third thing is more looking into timelines. How intensive will you use it by yourself? For how long are you going to use it? Is it months? Is it years? Etc. etc. And then you can think of concepts to with sharing and not ownership. To do this, I do think there's a mind shift needed. Very often I come across in my practice and so no, we have to own it ourselves. It's very difficult to communicate with others, to organize it across organizations. And I think there we need to step over. There you see why it's hindering us to make these steps more and more. I do believe that data and technology can help us there. It will make it easier to connect to others and to communicate with others, but even so to service users better, to find places, to use places better. There's a lot to tell about digital, of course. There's a lot of buts, which I won't elaborate on now, but that's another time. So I end up with a slogan, Dare to Share. I really believe that that will help us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. Very interesting to see that the idea of rethinking by sharing also really gets now a place in the building world. I think that's something 10 years ago probably would not really have happened. And yeah, thank you for this thoughts. Hello, Olga, you're the next one.
So hello everyone, nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm going to be discussing a bit about education and in particular BK education. So what drives education at the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment right now when it comes to circularity? Well, we sat around and we had to make sense out of this. And we tried to approach it by making lists. So what is it about circularity that's so interesting for the built environment? What is it that makes us want to integrate it in our curricula? So we came up with a list. And of course, one can say it's appealing. Yes. For others, it's necessary. It's a necessary change. But really, I don't want to go over the whole list. What's important for us is that it kind of bridges the technological, the social, and the values discussion. So the greatest tension that lies in between the divide, the conflict between technology and the values discussion, it kind of gets balanced, it kind of gets breached within the domain of circularity. And that duality, that dual character of circularity is really fascinating and really intriguing to further explore. So we talked about sharing thus far, we talked about sharing space, but what we think also needs to be done is to share an understanding, because otherwise we cannot build consensus. And already Alice has spoken about the mind shift change that's necessary. How do you transition to this mind shift? How do you position yourself into this new reality? So for us, there have been a lot of things going on, and mostly carried out by the CBE Hub, the Circular Built Environment Hub. I'm a proud member of that group, but also the Secular Impulse Initiative that's been going on for at least a year now and will also produce very interesting actions. So what we've been trying to do is exactly provide with tools and knowledge. So therefore we meet regularly to come up with definitions about terms. We have workshops discussing our philosophy as a Circular Built Environment Hub. People from different departments come together and share their thoughts and their research on the matter. And we're trying to establish what we call a shared vocabulary. When we refer to those terms, do we all mean the same thing? In addition to that, we are also looking to the other direction. So where do we want to go? On one hand, we know where we stand, or at least we're trying to figure that out. But where is it that we really want to go? So we formulated the Secular Learning Objectives list. And through that list, we are trying to make changes into curricula that's organically integrated. So we meet with people from the different courses, from the different learning lines, and we are trying to see whether there are some secular learning objectives that can match their own goals, their own objectives. On the other hand, we have 3 new actions coming up. The Circular Design Atlas, that's a collection of student work analyzing different case studies about circularity across scales. Teaching the teachers, that's a very important project for us, for it promotes the idea that not all of us are on the same page. So how do we train to be able to share this understanding I originally discussed? And finally, can we implement extracurricular activities that kind of focus on circularity and bring this new inspiration? Now, as educators, we are against a very difficult task, and that is to educate learners into a very complex world. And for some people, this complexity is very hard to describe. How can you teach students, how can you teach learners about things you are not very sure of them yourself? So the task becomes that, says Roland Barnett, for example, of enabling people to prosper in uncertainty. So when knowledge produces further uncertainty, the key for educators is to promote the notion of enabling learners to prosper. And for David Lewin, that thing means drawing attention to where you want your learners to go. What direction do you want them to take? So what we did, pedagogically speaking, is try to come up with a series of actions to promote circularity. That is, by creating ubiquitous encounters with it. So for some of you who are members of our master's programs For some of you who are just learners of our online courses, you might have noticed how many different formats we have to communicate with you, either through lecture series or specific assignments when you're in the school, but also through MOOCs when you're online, or profit courses, whether you're professionals and you're seeking for some guidance. And through all of these activities, we get back your insights and we try to make sense of what it is you're doing. We are also targeting thus a community that's not consisting solely of students, but of learners. So we are opening up to practitioners, industry partners, society in general, stakeholders who have some degree or kind of involvement with circularity. And we invite them openly always to join our endeavors. And finally, we integrate, again, organically in our curricula, research that comes from our PhD students, PhD researchers. Despite its not yetness, this is very valuable research for us, and thus we're always open to that. So we are a set of very intricate, very complex connections. But when we meet in those workshops and when we try to make sense, the moment we decide on something, the moment we say, oh, this is it, then we have it. The moment that for everything something makes sense is magical. And that's the key point for transitioning, making this personal, making it feel like you're sharing it with others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olga. And well, that now leads us to the second part of this event, the propositions. So we have a number of propositions prepared. Let's see how far we come. And we can start with the first one. Give you some time to read it and take it in. And Mark, yeah, maybe you can introduce that proposition.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think it's almost cliche to say global solutions need local solutions, or global societal problems need local solutions, but because we all feel that it's very true, right? So we went too far, and now we have to go a little bit back. But without actually going back, we have to also move forward as a society. And in what we do at our startup is what we come across is that by really thinking about that local scale, you start to see all that other things that also could happen at the local scale. So we think about local materials, local energy, how to use local facilities to produce our materials. But then all of a sudden we think, hey, why would some investor from the city in London or from San Francisco invest in our company if we could actually have the Dutch construction industry investor in our company, and then we make a much stronger bond. And then when you start thinking about that, you see all this potential out there in the real world to create a much stronger local or regional bond. And I think what we have to research in the, well, coming 5 to 8 years, we have to kind of face this challenge we have, is to explore and find solutions to how that, well, what's the right scale on meeting the, on building that new, more local, maybe it's regional, maybe it's on a country level, maybe it's on a, there's a lot of different skills, but we have to find the right skill for to meet those kind of challenges.
Well, if I see Connie's presentation, you could almost say a local problem asks for a global solution, because we're talking about value chains that go over the whole globe, and you have to think of that when you design your product.
Yeah, exactly. So you said it's sort of like almost like duh, but I would argue that in many cases global problems need global solutions. Thinking of climate change and biodiversity loss, just those are classic global problems that we are trying to address as a global society. Then again, you have a very good case here, because that's one of the things we struggle with. we need these global supply chains to make the products that we all want and love, and probably it will be impossible to have our smartphones or monitors or cars, electric cars, without the global supply chains. There's no lithium in Europe, as far as I'm aware, for batteries, I think. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And many other critical materials that we just don't have, which is what makes the circular economy interesting, because at least once we have it in Europe, we can perhaps keep it within our borders and reuse it forever and recycle it forever. So that would be a local solution to something of a global problem.
So the mushroom foam grown in your garden, is that the extreme way of a local product
Well,
thinking?
if you can make a smartphone from mushroom foam, that would be so cool. But we're not there yet, I guess, so it will not be the solution. Yeah. But things like thinking circular can be part of the solution.
So yeah, maybe that's a moment we can think about the dimension of the circle that we have. You know, let's say the mushroom smart form would be a small circle. In a way, Mark, you have created your own luxury solution, because basically what you do is a product that you produce yourself from the basis. But unfortunately, that's not possible. We've just seen 500-kilometer radius is almost, the limit when we talk about built environment. But what is the right dimension of that circle that we should aim at the moment?
I think it has to do a lot with the intelligence of the product. Like a smartphone has a global supply chain, but most building materials are so intelligent. Like insulation material, it's very, then it can be a local solution.
Aren't buildings also getting more and more intelligent nowadays?
Well, of course, yeah, the installation is getting more intelligent, and how you steer your installations, the electricity, everything on demand, you could say, the air on demand, heat on demand, that is complicated. But materials like wood, for example, you can grow it here in the Netherlands if you want to, and then you can use it and you can source it locally. Also helps a lot maybe for, we have to reduce eating cows anyway, so these meadows are going to be empty, so we might as well fill it up with material which you can use in building sites. So I think you're right about the solutions if you have, well, let's say dumb materials, but materials which have not complexity in themselves and products. But if you have really complicated products, then you have like a global supply chain, like what you said. I don't know if it's possible to organize a smartphone in the Netherlands at this moment. But,
Impossible.
Yeah.
But isn't ultimately the problem that we're thinking about circular economy in one circle? Well, it's actually like endless amounts of circles, which we have to facilitate. Because, well, we already said the circle of a smartphone is completely different than the circle of an insulation material. And that is also where that complexity again comes from, which I see, and I think we really have to embrace if we want to have a true circular economy, because we won't be able to design all of that up front. We have to kind of design society, maybe redesign society so that it can facilitate that, because otherwise it's just, we make a material that you can discard off in the Netherlands very, very, very good. But if it's in the Sahara, it's completely out of its context, right? So it doesn't do anything there anymore. So I think that's really, we have to, and I see ownership personally, that's very interesting, where you were talking about ownership, Ellen, is that I see ownership as a great factor to keep materials in the right place and keep them in the right loop and organize them collectively. So it's, maybe that just circle is much more complex, and I think also Kate Raworth talks about it a lot, is that it's much more about complexity. Much more complex than we think about it currently.
Yeah, complex, but also we need to think about supply itself and the amount we need. And if we think that in the Netherlands, the 1 million homes challenge that we have to build 1 million homes in 10 years, that's the slogan. We need a lot of supply, and basically the circle gets bigger, because that is we cannot do at the moment. We're not able to do that from the materials we get from recycling or demolition waste. And also my question, yeah, I'm just looking to Alice and Paul. What do you think? That amount of materials, do we have a chance to get that locally? Is that doable at all?
Well, you're the engineer.
Well, I'm more on the demand side, and you are indeed talking, Mark, about the supply side. I can imagine, but sorry, I don't have an answer to the amount of...
No, but you see the graphics, so we have to come up with a solution. And I think it's also partly how we deal with CO2. So if you have CO2 emissions combined with the material, then maybe there's some local solutions can be more, well, let's say first, that's more of a liveness in it. So, for example, we did a project and we ordered reed on the facade. Reed, you can grow it in the Netherlands. And then somebody said, the contract said, no, I'm going to import it from China because it's cheaper. I said, what? Why would you have like this product because it's almost hollow? Why would you ship it with all this volume? Because it was a few cents cheaper. But if you would say, well, if you had the transport of this material to the Netherlands and you tax the CO2, then you will be able, people say, well, I'm not going to get this reed from China, we're going to get it locally sourced. So I think that's a combination of availability and also, well, let's say, CO2 taxes on top of the materials, which can change.
Yeah, I'd like to add on that. I think this will change. So this makes the change. If we set the boundaries like such and such kilometers, then the supply chain will become more creative and come up with solutions. So as long as we don't do that if we demand space, materials, etc., if we don't set those boundaries, the industry won't change easily.
So you think it needs really top-down
well, we need to
governing?
We need to, or we should dare to ask to set these boundaries. Also as a client demanding or wanting a new environment or another environment.
Well, this lead platinum I showed you, that was very interesting because if you want to have lead platinum, you have to have this. If you have materials outside of the ring, you could say you don't get a lead platinum certification, which makes it very interesting. So you could have clients maybe saying, I want this, demanding I want to have the lead platinum, or maybe government say, well, I want to have this locally sourced. And then you will get a totally different kind of economy, local economy, which is viable and live and also, well, as a sense of surviving.
So basically incentives to also get this value shift, that you go away from that's the cheapest product, I get it a bit cheaper and I don't care where it comes from, to a more, make an incentive for people to think more in terms of the value, environmental values, and well, in these lease certificates, for example, they can really also promote by clients that they go this new path and they are willing to put some money into that change.
Well, yeah, I think so. Yeah, and what I said, the travel of materials towards the building site is a very important indicator of if you're going to use it. If the CO2 doesn't cost anything, products get shipped all over the world. There's also our products, our clothes get from everywhere. But if the CO2 was in let's say, taxed on top of the materials, then locally things would get more, let's say, produced. And then now it's going to be produced because it's more cheaper with labor, more. They don't have less environmental rules, for example, in other countries maybe. And then, well, then you get not a fair game. You don't have the same, let's say, fairness of buying the product.
Do you want to say something, Mark?
So what I hear Paul saying, and which I agree with 100%, because it's our day-to-day reality, that the need to move toward more sustainable solutions in the industry is in a niche currently, and it has to become, well, common practice. And so what I hear you say is global societal problems need carbon tax, more or less, because that will redesign our current economic system in a way that it, well, ultimately results in local solutions because transport and other inefficiencies are taxed out. And I think that I 100% agree with that.
If you can't get those materials locally, if it's just impossible, like the lithium I just mentioned, so would that mean that our electric vehicles will be possibly expensive because of the carbon tax on those materials, which means that it stops the whole transition to electricity in vehicles in its tracks? Because people can't afford them anymore.
Well,
I'm just being the devil's advocate here.
No, but that's a very interesting point. But that would move more towards unmotorized transportation, I guess, because also the fuel will be taxed. So ultimately, it redesigns the process, and it doesn't. Well, yeah, we'll see. We have to see. It's an experiment.
Pretty local and radical.
But again, it's about the smart product, or let's say the less smarter product, like building materials in itself are not that complex. And if you assemble things like on a smartphone, you need a lot of different components and chips and lithium, whatever, or a car. And then you cannot do it locally. But the building, like we talk about buildings in this, well, if you talk about buildings and let's say the 1 million buildings to be built is this coming 10 years, 15 years or so, where get all the products from? And that's, well, interesting if you would have like incentive from people to source it nearby. And at this moment, this incentive is not there. So it's going to be shipped all over Europe to here.
To quote a colleague who's not with us tonight, but is probably watching, David Peck, he would say that decarbonization is indeed a challenge that, however, passes not only through the mining processes, but also the values discussion, because we can mine cobalt for as long as we want, but it won't be enough to cover our needs to decarbonization. What we really need to look at is ways of sharing cars, sharing transport means, reducing our needs for electric cars, for example, by sharing transportation, means of transportation. So it's not just about what technology can offer, it's about how we view the world and our position in it and our resources. Hope I'm translating David good enough.
I think he would like your comments.
Yeah, also I think that's a good way to end this proposition. I know you were just wanting to jump in. Maybe a short note?
Well, yeah, one thought about things getting more expensive if you tax them. But I think you have to look at it as shifting taxes from one thing to the other. So why do we tax materials 20% and we tax labor 30 to 50% when we can decrease the tax on labor and make it more cheaper to repair stuff, for instance, and more expensive to buy new stuff? So it's not really something is getting more expensive because of climate change, but we really have to shift and transform our economy. I have to think about it like that. So there will be losers and there will be winners. But it's a change we have to make.
So basically to find the right scale and narrow the scales, it needs some incentives basically to set the value debate straight. Yeah? Okay, should we leave it with that? Then we can move to the next proposition. Who has the clicker to move on? Oh yeah, there we are. Ownership is the model of the past. Service is the future. And Alice, you volunteered to pitch this.
Yes,
one.
you asked me to, so I will do that. Well, of course, in line with my pitch at the beginning, I definitely think that ownership as a traditional model is not helping us forward from the demand perspective, Mark. And yes, I think if we want to optimize scarcity of space and resources, I think we really need to think about or work on our service models, and not only to optimize the scarcity, but also to serve users better. So know better their demands, match their demands better. Yes, so I really think we need to work on better service models for that.
Okay, and would that be in your ideal world 100% service future, or do we still have ownership?
Well, if you know me a little bit, I'm more nuanced, but I do think to make the step, you should be bold and really yeah. I think on the demand side, what I'm saying, I really think we should go to use instead of owning things and keeping it with you. Then you never can optimize across many possibilities of use.
Connie?
Yeah. So yeah, of course, I'm the one doing the stuff that was in your slide. So and I often get asked that question, like, should we no longer own stuff, and should we just get access to it through leasing or some kind of model? And it's way more nuanced. Of course, there's maybe a few stuff like maybe you don't want to have to drag such a big monitor into your house and then get rid of it again at some point in time, but it would be nice if somebody came in and took it away and maybe replace it with a newer model after 10 years or so. So for some products it makes sense, and for the vast majority it doesn't, and people will never want that. And actually, except maybe for the products that are in the streets, like the bikes that you showed, and the Felix scooters, and the sharing cars, and that seems to work fine, but in the domestic environment, it's much, much harder to get these non-ownership models accepted. So we have to find other ways to get these products circulating.
Yes, I agree. I think that's true, that there are nuances, but I also think that we still own a lot. Like my neighbors, I can share the tooling for the gardens. We can share it with each other. And I think there will also be, personalized ways. So to say, it's okay if you have a private, or how do you say this? That you have your own view on it, and you say, okay, this kind of stuff I want to have by myself, and other stuff I can share, and that will be different from person to person. But I do think that that other service models and offering that to users will help them to make a step.
Definitely, yes, I totally agree. And you see this happening. So there's a couple of like washing machines, dryers, refrigerators.
Exactly.
Those are happening. Those are being offered in service models more and more often. The companies are still struggling. We work with quite a few of them. They're struggling with the value proposition. They're struggling to keep their business at scale. And to get it at scale, and there's lots of unexpected negative rebounds. For instance, a company that has washing machines leased out, pay per wash, so you pay for each wash that you do. Very nice concept. But they found that people just get the washing machine and put it in the holiday homes where they are once a year, and then they use it a couple of times, and then they pay for each wash. But that's of course not a business concept. So they're actually losing money on that. So it's a learning curve that we're currently in, and many mistakes are made, and pilots are tried, and companies fail, and whether it's going to scale, I don't know yet. It's hard for these relatively small products that people really like to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there's also in the building materials is also some, well, it's getting more and more common, for example, that carpet is not owned by you anymore. So you have a carpet and then they're going to restore it in 5 years' time. So they take the material back and then recycle it. So there's getting more and more this kind of, well, maybe not ownership, but let's say business models wherein you just lease, for example, your building materials. And then
But it does make a lot of sense in a B2B environment, business-to-business environment. For offices, you could actually just lease your entire office interior. It does make perfect sense.
Yeah, because a lot of things get outdated. For example, like hotel rooms. After 5 years, they're going to refurbish them all because they're out of dated and they're being smashed up or whatever. And then, so I can imagine that you have like business model. People own, for example, the furniture or the carpets or whatever, and then you're going to resource their own material back, and they're going to change it back into the same material. So I think that's a kind of interesting option, also money-wise, because then you don't have to invest so much into your building, and you have another kind of building proposition.
Yes, it's very interesting. That's the office we have in Amsterdam is also, so the fit out is also capitalized in the business model. So.
And it also...
Can you lease your installation?
Well,
does it make sense?
Well, it does make sense because there's value in the material, and then when you can retrieve it, you can, well, as manufacturer, or you probably know best how to retrieve that value which is in. And what is interesting, especially what you were saying, Paul, about the business-to-business market being very, well, potential for a service model, we see that as well. Where we talk to product manufacturers, for instance, who are interested in using our material, and they're complaining that they're currently making the cheapest product they can possibly make because it's seen as a, and then we're talking about interior walls, interior doors, facades actually, and they're making them the cheapest way possible. While if it would be a service model, they could put in better materials, afford for them, and then make the profit not after when the economic lifespan runs out after 7 years, but actually when the product lifespan runs out after 25 years or after 50 years. So there's a much better business model there as well for using less materials through a service model.
Yeah, I think this is really one of the biggest arguments. You make a product that's really suited for its purpose, and you know, not building facades that can last 70 years and then tearing down after 40 years. Yeah, so I think there's a lot to gain.
Yeah, but there you have the wording service. Eh? If you know where you're servicing for, better, what you're saying, Tilman. So that's one way of talking about service models is far better than not having that incorporated.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how that develops. I must say it's super complicated. We tried that with facades successfully, and there is, let's say, there is a business gap in it, but it's so complicated because, you know, the legal aspects, financial aspects. So you have to turn the whole auxiliary industry that's behind it also into that model. So I think that my feeling is like starting with stuff. Huh? And that's the easiest thing, is maybe the easier way to go, and then explore those models on a larger scale.
What happens though, you have in the installations is also, you have energy service companies. So instead of that you own your own installation in your building, you have an energy service company and they provide you energy, and they make the installations and they repair the installation, so they have much better quality because they're going to have to guarantee that you have the right amount of energy. So that's, I think, an interesting model because you have much more quality and the lifespan of the materials get longer in that sense.
And also the value for the user and the owner, because this is a complex thing and you don't want to deal with that on a daily basis. If you can lease that out, it makes your life a lot easier.
And what we shouldn't forget is that if we talk about services and we're shifting ownership again, right? It's not, somebody still owns the stuff. In certain cases, it's super interesting to shift the ownership to the person who is best capable of dealing with it. Exactly. However, there are also examples where, well, as you gave, it's much more complex. Well, personally, when you see the cars, which are of course a great example, or the electric scooters, and then nobody owns a car anymore. No, well, there's 1 or 2 or 3 companies owning all the cars now, and is that actually a good thing? So it isn't the holy grail, in my opinion, shifting ownership.
Very good point. That's the dark side of access, we call that.
Yeah.
Because who can grant you access or take it away, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's,
and maybe there an interesting, or what I see great potential in is shared ownership, right? So or communal ownership, and that's also what I what we are actually looking forward in our company. I don't want to own my company. I want the building industry to own my company, because that it will create the most value for, or the local building industry to own my company, because then it creates the most value for them, and then it will be most efficiently placed, and not to create money for me or for my shareholders or whatever. And I think we have to look towards that kind of ownership models where we own things collectively, and the right scale for that again. So is that a city, is that a country, is that a business sector, etc. That's where, well, we have to shift ownership, but there will always stay ownership.
Yeah, so I mentioned also the traditional way of ownership. So, but I like the wording or the concept of shared ownership, what you mentioned. Yeah, sure.
Okay, can we maybe conclude that we see a big potential in that, yeah? But on the way to the service future, there's a lot of things we need to explore, and also a lot of research to be done, which is good for us.
Maybe we could call it ethics, ownership with different ethics.
Okay, well, then it's time to move to the next proposition. Give you time to read it. Okay, who's going to introduce that? Was that my pitch? Okay.
Can I ask a question? What is the circularity narrative, actually? Because I've heard so many.
Okay, let me try to explain that.
Yeah.
That is the narrative of proudly call being circular. We see that, for example, in the building industry. That's a label that's put on everything, to extreme. Oh, it's very funny. Oh, we are circular. I already had a quote from the industry. Someone told me, well, what is circular anyhow? Aren't we already pretty circular? So it's basically used as a cheap excuse to improve on things that we're already doing. It is also politically quite seemingly neutral, unpolitical. You hear that by politicians. They say, oh, circularity, that's very good. The easy thing for them, and what makes it so tempting, is it's just we invent a couple of new business models, and then we can just go on with our growth model, and we don't really have to fundamentally change. And I think that's also why it's so promoted so widely.
So yeah, you were saying it's this narrative of decoupling, right? So
yeah.
Through the circular economy, we can have economic growth with no environmental impact, or with less environmental.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly, and because it's becoming so widespread now, that the need for real change seems to disappear and becoming like a greenwashing thing, and maybe in 5 years we're not even talking about it, and we miss the opportunity for this, let's say, great theoretical model to have a real impact.
I actually agree. I think that's a real danger. The way it's being co-opted at the moment by politicians in European Union language, but also in many companies, it's a definite thing that we should fight against, from our perspective as researchers, to argue and debate at least for a more critical perspective, as you were just quoting that paper on the circular economy. And because it does do away, because the fundamental change needed, of course, is that we have to realize that economic growth and a decline in environmental impact often don't go together. Sometimes locally, they do, but on a global scale, I think it's been researched plenty. It doesn't. It just doesn't work. And if we perpetuate that myth through these narratives, it's going to be so unhelpful.
Yeah, but on the other side, sure, we'll be happy that circularity seems to have such a broad support at the moment, and whereas in other countries, they are far behind.
I'm very happy, but we have also a responsibility as researchers and architects and designers, right, to try at least to keep the debate sharp in that sense, to keep people on their toes and keep challenging. I mean, I've heard that quite often, like, oh no, you know, it's great because we're going to do everything circular and then we can consume more all the time. And you designers, you can keep churning out great new ideas. So that's not the way to go here.
No, I think one of the things to work on this is that you make things more concrete, more quantitative, and I think this week the Dutch Green Building Council set a set of boundaries like the Paris Proof boundary for material use in buildings, for new buildings and for renovation. And then the truth will come out that we are not there yet at all. So to make it more quantitative, this will help that people cannot just do the greenwashing, to say it in that way.
Isn't it just a phase which this kind of transitions go through? Like, I don't believe that, especially, well, the students here today or at home, they still call that, they still believe well, that circularity crap certain companies are putting out there. Yeah, it's certainly being misused, but that's going to work against companies very soon, I think.
Well, you would think also that we are here in the university, so that there would be like innovation and knowledge and fundamental research about to address this problem. You know, say, calculate which is the most circular approach, and that's, I think, then you have science against someone who has a narrative which is not maybe truthful. Then you can counterattack the narrative. And you have a new narrative because then you have, well, what we can do here in Delft, research and say, well, this is the way to go. And that, I think that's, well, that should be done more. And what I'm always addressing is the amount of money that's spent in the building industry, and the amount of money they put into research is so little. If you would have, like, for example, Philips, they have like 10% or 20% of their budget into research. And
not anymore, I believe.
Well, not anymore. Well, less and less. Well, they're also going downhill with the company, maybe. That's therefore. But well, maybe then Google, for example, or Apple, they have much. So I would address that there should be much more research done and much more innovation being stimulated, much more, you would say, working together with the universities, just to not to make this like an semantic discussion about the narrative and circularity. It should be hard figures. Otherwise, we are going to we're not going to curve the CO2 emissions.
Yeah, sometimes here we say that circularity requires a systemic change, and when we look deeper into that, we realize that we have to kind of dissolve the boundaries between the different entities. Right? So our academic boundaries to industry boundaries to practice boundaries, they have to be dissolved and learn from each other. And I think we are learning a lot when we work with industry partners in different programs, educational programs, because we get feedback directly from the field. And we then can reformulate this and generalize it and share it with other industry partners that have not yet taken that course. So by reconsidering our place in the world and our accountability towards informing others, I'm talking as an academic here, but I think we need to pick up that glove and actually share what we know and ways of communicating with others and dissolve those boundaries. I think this is one of the tasks, the upcoming tasks for us at least.
Okay, dissolve the boundaries. Yeah, maybe it's a good ending, but I think we
fundamental
conclude it's an immersion framework, right? And what we could do is like sail with that framework as far as we can until we have a better understanding, and then maybe also the narrative will change again, and it will not be circularity anymore, but we have a new theory that helps us better. Yeah?
Then it's a narrative that we can all relate to somehow.
Yeah. Okay, can we have another one? The last one? Okay. Okay, Olga, but this is yours, huh?
Yes, yeah. That's why I was talking about shared understanding before, because it is indeed really complex. So many different things to consider. We started with 4 scales, now we're up to 6, and maybe by next year the scales will be 8. Nobody knows. So identifying how this works is really difficult, and making people communicate is really difficult. Now, I think that hearing what you've said so far, what is required is a change indeed, but it's not just societal. In the large scale, since we are talking about scales, I think it's a shift in the psyche. And it's a very esoteric, very internal thing we have to undergo. The other day I was reading something about consumers becoming users, even better, considering consumers not as users but as doers. And the moment you consider them as doers, you put them into action and you start defining the actions, then this all becomes very energetic and very easy to comprehend, that we actually have to do something. It's not about thinking things or passively accepting other people's narratives. It's also becoming complicit, actively complicit in all of this. So I see why stakeholders are confused, because this takes a lot of energy. This takes a lot of transitioning. It shakes our fundamental values, but that's why it's also very fascinating and intriguing to do and to undergo through this transformation, because ultimately this is something that relates to our accountability as humans, to our accountability as citizens, to all levels of accountability throughout.
Yeah, but I'm risking that it's becoming a academic debate, and it's a lot of theory and scales and how to do that, and that what you're telling, the example you showed was very interesting, how complicated this all is. And if you bring all the complexity, does it kind of block real change, because you're kind of like, oh, this is too big for me, this picture. So how can we get going and doing the right things, but keeping it so simple, so basically you can engage stakeholders, people and users, because they don't, let's say, normally won't understand the full scope of that. Do we need to make things much more simple in the communication?
Well, that's for sure. That's an open door, I guess, yeah. And well, I did, maybe the discussion about this proposition is like skill complicated communication, yeah. I think, well, of course, everything is complicated in the sense that, let's say, our environment and the climate change are very complicated, but we have to address them anyway. So we have to come up with a solution to, well, get everybody in action. I think that the best way is just to do things. Like, for example, that's why I also took a building form with me, just to explain that things can be done. You know, it's not impossible. And then you should, if something happens, then you should just address it and communicate about it. So this is possible. Let's copy it, for example. And that, therefore, otherwise we're going to, well, this is a statement which freezes everything, you know. you don't come further, and that's a bit of a pity. And then all the students who are watching now, I would like to hope that they say, okay, well, I'm going to change the world. This is something what this debate should be about, I think, about activating and motivating people just to come up with new solutions. Like this gentleman who is making his own building material, who is doing this, you know. It's only 5 years possible. It's really unique. And these are the things you should, you know, give a platform and be proud of, and make sure that I'm going to use this material for in the next building. I'm going to try to find it and then see what happens. And then you start a motor, and otherwise this is a very complicated, well, statement which motivates nobody.
Isn't the point that skill has or communication has a skill of its own? Because it's human, right? So it has a human skill. And we can talk about problems which have a completely different skill, because all of the humans together created it, but we have to talk about it on a human scale, person to person, and then you can have kind of a domino effect you were describing. It's like one person inspires another, and if we really look at it from top down, then you will communicate top down. But that's, I think, why I'm so pro local action, is that it inspires other local action, and that it kind of, because what is local for me, living in The Hague, is maybe not different than a person also local to me living in Rotterdam. And that's already kind of, so everybody has their own local reality, but we are intercommunicating anyway, and on a human scale. So if we kind of can choose that scale for our communication about problems and the actions, then there will be a wave, right? It's molecule versus molecule versus molecule, and then you have a ripple effect.
So that means for you the social scale is maybe the most important.
Yeah, I would agree immediately to that, actually, because that's what we find in our work. Circular economy is very much an economic and a technical concept still for many. Material flows naturally, but if we don't take people along, doers, users, whatever you want to call them, consumers, it's just not going to work. It's just, you're going nowhere. You keep cycling in your little bubble. So yeah, totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we agree all. Taking responsibility, start with yourself, with your own community. That's I think what's needed, and not use this complexity as an excuse. So I think you mentioned in your way of explaining this proposition that accountability, that's the wording you use it, and I think that's very important that we feel that. Yeah.
To be honest, I think that's a really good statement to end at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, the time is up. I could go on to discuss with you much longer, but unfortunately, this is it. So, thank you very much. Thank you all. Yeah, see you next time. And I see Javier standing there, so I'll leave the last words to you.
This means this is over. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for your contributions tonight. I really hope that we leave the room tonight with an open debate. I think the conversation needs to go on. Circularity is obviously essential. We all know that. I just hope as educator that we don't let circularity become yet another alibi for capitalism to keep going. So I think that's essential, and this is what I would like to let our students know. Next BK Talks will be celebrated. I'm completely changing topic now because this is what I must do. Next BK Talk will take place next December 10th. And we will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Masters of Landscape Architecture at the faculty with a BK talk and with an exhibition that we will be opening that day. I hope that the faculty will be then open, depending on what the regulations will be or restrictions will be, but you are all more than welcome to join us. Thank you very much and have a good night.